Hey everyone, it's Reverend Susan Gage, and my apologies for the fact that our Trinity Sunday service did not get put up on Facebook. That was my fault. I forgot the camera. But there was a lot of response to my sermon, so I thought I'd just go ahead and record this and then put it up on our YouTube channel. And hopefully you're going to start subscribing to the YouTube channel, and maybe we're going to have some other videos up there in the future. I certainly hope so. So I'm going to skip over the very first part of my sermon because it was kind of a joke, making fun of the fact that it was Trinity Sunday and I don't have a deacon or a seminarian that I can pass the sermon off and say, here, you talk about the doctrine of the Trinity. Because I didn't really want to get into a treatise on the Trinity. And that's where we're going to pick up my sermon. So whenever a preacher tries to get into describing the Trinity or giving some kind of explanation as to why we have this triune God of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they always try to use these metaphors. And I've heard just hundreds of them. But it's a matter of faith. And when you try and put matters of faith into words, you're always going to fall short. In my experience, and maybe in yours too, to understand the Trinity is not an intellectual exercise. It's a feeling. And so then how do we come to comprehend that experience and take it in? I think this is when it's a good time to look back at our first reading from this morning, or Sunday morning, and spend some time with Lady Wisdom. If we think back to last week's event of Pentecost and the disciples, where they find themselves lit up inside with a fire that poured out of their mouths, praising God in every language imaginable at the time, the Spirit, the promised advocate, blew into the room like a mighty wind to light the flames inside of these folks. With this reading from Proverbs, we're getting something of a personification of that fire. It's a feminine energy, which existed from the beginning with God. She's a creative energy. She's a master worker. And she's crying out from the heights, live! Her voice echoes from this corner and to the town gates, all the way over to that crossroad, to listen. Listen to her voice so that all may live. In Greek, they call her Sophia. In Hebrew, she's Shekhinah. In English, we call her the Holy Spirit. Now, I'm kind of sorry that the reading cuts out a whole bunch of verses in chapter 8 of Proverbs that have a lot to say to us in this fractured time that we're living in the country. I'll give you just a few of those missing points. Wisdom utters truth. Wisdom isn't going to feed us with twisted or crooked things. Wisdom calls on us to gain knowledge rather than jewels and choice gold. Those are just some of the good parts that are left out of our reading. I imagine those who put together our lectionary texts probably were thinking strictly about the world's creation and wanted us to get to the poetry of verses 22 through 31 of chapter 8. But those other parts that I just read, those are worth us having in our heads too, as we think about the role wisdom plays into the way of knowing our triune God. It's fascinating to me to consider wisdom's role in the Trinity. We hear of her presence when there were no depths, no springs abounding with waters, no mountains, and how she was brought forth before the beginning of the earth. Was she born? Did she pre-exist? She certainly seems to have an intimate relationship with God. It all sounds very familiar to the opening of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. He was in the beginning with God. He, the Word. But then we have Proverbs. She was created in the beginning of God's work, the first of his acts long ago. So she was in the beginning of creation as well. The Word and wisdom were both with and in God at the beginning. As I'm thinking about this he and she, which really becomes a they, them, theirs of the Trinity, I'm imagining a kind of dance and an intimate relationship where the three are involved and intertwined and whirling and spinning with such fluidity and ease that we can hardly tell which one is leading, and yet knowing that they're all following each other in the same dance steps. As one commentator noted, the Hebrew phrase that translates brought forth has a root which also means whirl or dance. And when you're dancing with a partner, it's a relationship. One person is moving forward, the other is mirroring those steps moving backwards. One is leading, the other is following. The fluidity of the movement, whether waltzing or two-stepping or free-forming it in some way, becomes an effortless flow around the dance floor. I remember going out one night into D.C. in my first year of seminary. Some friends from Tallahassee had been hyping up this band to me called the Bumper Jacksons. They were playing in a gig in a basement in one of the barbecue restaurants in the city. Their music was a mix of Mardi Gras jazz meets Appalachian banjo Americana. And before long, there were probably 40 or 50 people swinging and twirling as the band played on. It was amazing, and it was joyful in the way that dance ought to be. That's the sort of revolving and raucously joyous relationship I can imagine happening between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit as they go about creating, redeeming, and sustaining us. Their infectious and intermingled happiness spins its way into our hearts and minds when we think about those parts of creation that bring us delight. The way a baby looks with wonder and curiosity at their parents, or the satisfaction and anticipation that comes when picking that first ripe tomato off the plant you've been tending to so carefully. These are the moments when we dare to bring ourselves out onto the dance floor. When we participate in the thrill of creation, we might find ourselves swept off our feet into the dance, being led by the Spirit, following Jesus as we keep up with this tango of God. The way we experience the Trinity can sometimes depend on which person of the Trinity we feel ourselves dancing with at the moment. That's what I mean by it being more about an experience and feeling than all those words of strained metaphors. The key to it is that we must feel free enough and allow ourselves to dance and not try to take over the lead. That seems to be the Achilles heel or that second left foot that keeps tripping us up. Even though wisdom is calling from every direction and giving us the tune, sometimes we don't want to listen to those wise words in her lyrical song. She's playing a waltz, and we want to do the punk rock pogo. Even though wisdom promises to lead us to truth, that truth requires us to dance a little differently, change our steps, listen to those notes. We resist, preferring another dance partner, a different song. Or maybe we don't want to dance at all and remain a wallflower. Maybe our ears have become so full of other voices we can't hear wisdom's refrain at all. And while wisdom values knowledge over choice gold and jewels, how many times will we allow bright, shiny objects to blind us to what we've gained through our experience and knowing, and shuffle ourselves off into a corner. In the gospel lesson, Jesus tells the disciples that he has many more things to tell them, but they cannot bear them now. But he urges them to wait on the Spirit, who will speak all truth to them. As we go forth from this place, we are being invited to listen to that same truth. Pay attention to that voice of wisdom and enter the dance to the beat our Trinity desires for the world. That wisdom is not foreign to us. It's been with us, around us, and in us for a long time. Listen. In the name of our creative, dancing, triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.